Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais bien me remercier pour l'invitation ici à Kiev, à l'occasion de la publication de mon livre qui est un grand honneur pour moi. Avoir mon petit livre tchèque traduit en russe avec l'image splendide de la cathédrale de Saint-Sophie ici. Alors c'est un grand honneur et une grande joie pour moi aussi. Alors j'aimerais bien remercier Constantin qui a accepté ce livre dans sa collection littéraire. En même temps, j'aimerais bien remercier un traducteur, M. Iliabey, qui a traduit tout spontanément le livre qui était étudiant à notre pays, en République tchèque à Prague, au Brno, je crois, qui a traduit mon livre en russe. Et aussi au rédacteur de mon livre, Madame Daria Morozova, qui a eu, j'imagine, beaucoup de travail en traduisant. Alors je remercie à tout le monde. J'ai choisi pour aujourd'hui aussi le thème de Gregory of Nyssa, mais c'était un petit peu difficile de trouver le témoignage chez Gregory of Nyssa, et finalement j'ai trouvé le témoignage de Grégoire sur sa sœur, Sainte Macrina, sur sa vie et sa mort. Je m'excuse de n'être pas capable de parler ni ukrainien ni russe, même si j'ai appris la langue russe depuis des années, mais en fait, j'ai jamais appris vraiment. Alors, il m'a fallu écrire mon exposé en anglais. Alors, je passe en anglais, je m'excuse pour cette rupture. J'espère que la conférence sera traduite en So, Gregory of Nyssa, witness of Macrina's life and death. Okay. In contrast to Augustine or his namesake Gregory of Nazianzus, Gregory of Nyssa did not feel any need to write an account of his own life or the great deeds which the power of God performed through him. On the other hand, he regarded it as his task to record for the times to come the story of someone else's life, namely his sister Macrina, in his Vita Sancta Macrina. Unlike in the case of the life of Moses, who, as a model of virtue, also became a subject of Gregory's account later on, or in case of Gregory the Wanderer's life, Gregory can bear personal testimony when speaking about Macrina. For the sake of future generations, Gregory's narrative thus aims to save from oblivion and ineffectiveness the life of a woman who raised herself to the highest peak of human virtue through philosophy. I would like to focus on three motives which are included in this statement by Gregory and around which Gregory's account of Macrina is built. It is first, life of a woman, and second, which reached the peak of virtue through philosophy, and third, the very peak of human virtue. So there will be 3 points in my paper, life of a woman, philosophy, and virtue. Before I return to the 3 motives, let me point out that there is yet another testimony about his sister which Gregory left to us and on which I will also draw, namely the dialogue on the soul and resurrection. Gregory and Macrina were engaged in this dialogue, sometimes called the Christian Fido, shortly before Macrina's death. It does not give an account of Macrina's life and death in the way the Vita does, but of her wisdom in the matters of Christian teachings. And now to my 3 points. First, life of a woman. Gregory's life of Saint Macrina is the earliest surviving biography of a Christian woman. Gregory does not hide his admiration of the fact that the subject matter of the record is a woman's life. However, he goes on to say that it is in fact not appropriate to call her a woman, because she went beyond the nature. What Gregory means is probably not only the fact that his sister overcame the weakness of her sex and became equal to man, but that she overcame human nature as such. The fact that she transcended her nature is manifested in the fortitude with which Macrina succeeded in setting reason against passion in order to comfort her mother after Macrina's beloved brother Naucratius died prematurely. But it was mainly when facing her own death that Macrina showed great courage, which transcended the common nature. This she also tried to encourage in Gregory, who, during their last conversation, became desperate over her approaching death and the death of their much admired brother Basil, who had died not a long time before that. Macrina's wisdom and courage thus stand in opposition not only to her mother's despair or lament the women from her convent mourning her death, whom Gregory can hardly pacify, but also to Gregory's own weakness. In the dialogue on the soul and resurrection, it is Gregory who represents pathos, the passion, fear of death and grief, while Macrina rejects them as unreasonable, contrasting them similarly to Socrates in the Phaedo with rational argumentation, logos. In this dialogue, Gregory calls his older sister his teacher, the Dioscurus. Her task is to refute all philosophical teachings on the soul incompatible with the notion of immortality, and to expose those lines in scripture which relate to the immortality of the soul and resurrection of the body. Macrina's role seems to resemble that of Diotima in the Symposium, who, however, played to let's expose the nature of life, not to face an approaching death by means of arguments. While the role of the only female character in the Phaedo, the Plato's Phaedo, Socrates' wife, Xantippe, is quite the opposite. She is the embodiment of natural bonds and affections which obstruct philosophical discourse. So here we have no parallel between Gregory and Plato. For Gregory, Macrina is a female character. It is not just a worthy successor to her grandmother, whose name his sister carried, and whom she resembled in her willingness to endure physical hardship for Christ. Nor is she just a worthy holder of the secret name Thecla, revealed to her mother as an augury of Macrina's monastic pursuits. By the same token, she is not just a bride of the unseen bridegroom to whom she has dedicated her body and her soul from her infancy up to now, and towards whom her approaching death is directing her. For Gregory, Macrina also, and perhaps above all, embodies the ideal of Christian wisdom, or rather, love of wisdom. It is philosophy. So I come to my second point, philosophy, love of wisdom. The expression love of wisdom, philosophia, and derived forms appears in the life of Macrina 16 times. What Gregory means by it, however, is not classical education. It is instruction in the secular curriculum, which draws on poetry to a large extent. This was not given to Macrina at all, because her pious mother did not consider it right to instruct her daughter by means of such pagan studies. When her younger brother, Basil, returned home from school, where he studied rhetorics, proud of his skills, Macrina convinced him to give up this vocation and study philosophy. So he withdrew from the worldly show, Gregory says, and chose a life of manual labor, poverty, and a mode of living that would, without impairment, lead to virtue. Her beloved brother, Naucratius, dedicated himself to philosophy by regulating his own life through moderation. He left for a forest where he took care of poor and helpless old men. It was also a kind of philosophy. The youngest brother, Peter, was brought up by Macrina from his early childhood, so that he could be raised to the high goal of philosophy when he was still a boy. Macrina even became a guide for her own mother towards philosophy. It is towards her immaterial and simple or humble life. It means a life in the poverty of a convent. In all these passages, philosophy is synonymous to a monastic or quasi-monastic life dedicated to labor and poverty. The members of Peter's and Macrina's communities are called those who philosophize in this place. To share a philosopher's table means to be a guest at the monastery and to share their meal. But at the same time, it also probably refers to the conversation there. Macrina not only gave her guests a meal, but she offered them the wealth of philosophy as well. A higher level of philosophy is also what Gregory calls the dialogue in which he and Macrina were engaged when Macrina was on her deathbed. The dialogue on the soul and the resurrection mentioned above. What we learn here about this dialogue is how Macrina was lifted up by her philosophical discourse on the soul. Macrina philosophizing up to her last breath, not showing any signs of fear of the approaching death, resembles a being more angelic than human in Gregory's age, or at least completely detached from the flesh. In the dialogue, not only Greek and pagans thinking, but also Christian teaching is called philosophy. Our philosophy only adopts from the Gentile one what is in concord with Scripture. For example, it does not accept the teaching on metempsychosis as a whole, but only employs the immortality of the soul, which is complemented by the teaching on resurrection. The expression philosophy is used through the dialogue to refer to teachings, especially of the ancient thinkers, but it sometimes refers to their Christian applications as well. Macrina also reveals her familiarity with individual philosophical schools and their methods of argumentation. For example, she recapitulates Epicurus' teaching, the Stoic theory of elements, the doctrine of man as a microcosm, a single spiritual force which makes sense perception possible, approaching Neoplatonism, the Platonic notion of passions, the epithymoides, desire and feeling, is the moving forces of the soul, and various forms of the conception of reincarnation. Presumably it was Gregory who put these words into Macrina's mouth. But thanks to the dialogue, the image of philosophy, which brought Macrina to the highest peak of human virtue, gains a more speculative character, even a scholarly character. It was probably not just a matter of monastic asceticism, but also spiritual meditation, love of wisdom, in its full Greek meaning of moral and intellectual exercise. This brings us to the last topic, namely virtue, as the goal of philosophy. That is the third point and last point. The expression arrêté appears 12 times in the life of Saint Macrina. It has been said already that Basil chose philosophy or a life which would lead to virtue. It is, he gave up the fame of a rhetorician and accepted voluntary poetry and labor. Macrina's mother is also described as a virtuous woman, who was following the will of God in all things and embracing an exceptionally pure and spotless way of life, so that she had chosen not to marry. Even as a married woman later on, she was perfectly schooled in virtue. But nature, physics, won out even over her when she learned of Naucrasius' death, or the death of her beloved son. It was in this situation that the great Macrina's virtue became evident. Unlike her mother, she managed to remain calm by setting reason against passion. As we have heard, she kept herself in hand, and by her own firmness, she became a bulwark for her mother's weakness. In this passage, virtue seems to be identical with the victory of reason over passion. It is presented as firmness and even transcending of one's nature. However, human virtue, nature, can also be a good teacher, as Gregory shows, using his youngest brother Peter as an example. Without any Gentile education, Peter attained the same virtue as the great Basil. His sufficient teacher in all good things was nature, with Macrina as an example, which he was able to watch and follow constantly. The place where Macrina dwelt, her monastery, her convent, is even described as a school of virtue, totes artes, from Mysterium. As we can see, there is a close connection between virtue and philosophy. It is a life devoted to God. Interestingly, the relationship between virtue and nature is not quite clear. On one hand, virtue means transcending one's nature so that passion can be controlled by reason. On the other hand, nature can help attain virtue, as we saw in the case of Peter. So what it actually is that Gregory means by virtue? It is my last point. In the dialogue on the soul and resurrection, it is said that desire and anger, it means the arithmetical the horses in Plato's chariot, are not an instinctive part of the nature of the soul, because Moses, as a model of virtue, was able to overcome them. As it is not possible to give up what is included in the definition of any being, anger and desire are not part of human nature, says Gregory of Nyssa. These passions are external to the nature, not in its essence. The soul is an image of divine beauty, and as such, its nature can only consist in the reasoning faculty. Passions, which also pertain to animals, become part of it when the soul joins the body. At the same time, however, Macrina explains, drawing on the biblical parable of the wheat and tares in the Gospel according to Matthew, that bad impulses of the soul cannot be uprooted because, along with these, the soul could lose the good impulses leading to virtue. According to the biblical account, man was created to have dominion over the animals. In Macrina's interpretation, this means that reason is to have dominion over passions and to use them to a good end. It is to attain virtue. If men were absolutely free from passions, they would feel no desire to raise themselves to divine things, says Macrina. The contradiction in these two positions may perhaps be accounted for by different degrees of perfection, like in Stoicism, while passions can be used to a good end. The highest perfection, here attributed to Moses only, consists in overcoming them completely. This, however, does not remove the contradiction between a nature which does not include passions, as in the case of Moses, and a nature which is to be overcome by subjecting passions to reason, as in the story of Macrina's life. Perhaps Gregory used the expression nature less precisely in the story of his sister's life than Macrina herself in their last dialogue, as Gregory captured. In any case, Gregory's Macrina, transcending her nature in the sense of subjecting passions to reason, and similar to angels in the degree of her separation from the body, seems to resemble Moses, who was free from passions. Despite the contradictory formulation, transcending of the nature achieved by Macrina may mean the same thing as freeing one's nature from passions, as it is attributed to Moses in the dialogue. Gregory's sister is thus presented as a female counterpart to Moses, a model of virtue which is understood here as a way of overcoming the passions by reason through the love of wisdom. It is a life and solitude dedicated to poverty, labor, and philosophical discourse. His narrative is not only a remembrance of the beloved sister and celebration of his family, but also a personal testimony about the power of philosophy as a way to attain the virtue, and about the victory of the love of wisdom over fear